Second. Great. So you've been working in the nonprofit technology sector at the intersection of disruptive technologies and nonprofit missions for decades as a trainer. Is the disruptive nature of AI any different than previous technologies that we've seen?
So I'm going to say yes and no. All right. So most disruptive technologies go through a particular pattern over the course of 3 to 5 years ish. And you can see this through something that's called the Gartner hype cycle of technology adoption. Some of you may be familiar with it, and it kind of looks like this. So it kind of like goes up and then goes down. And so the beginning is like the innovation trigger. In this case, it's releasing ChatGPT free to the public. And then there's the peak of inflated expectations. That's all the hype that's going on now. And that's kind of where we are. And then it comes down to the trough of disillusionment. And that's starting to happen. And then it goes up slightly to the point where it becomes boring. And we can't imagine like not having it in our lives for our work. And that's a predictable pattern that happens. I've seen it happen with personal computers into the workplace, with the web, when websites were launched, social media, mobile phones, very predictable pattern. But there's difference in generative AI that makes it slightly different is that previously a lot of the technology did more rote tasks and did things faster for us, right? And AI certainly can do that, but it's beginning to approximate human knowledge work, tasks that require a higher level of cognitive skills to generate value. So for example, what that means is, generative AI can write a first half decent draft of written material, whether it's a report, a donor profile, or it can organize information for us. It can analyze information and do it pretty well as a first draft. And that's the thing for the first time where it's actually approximating the skills of more highly trained workers. All right. So that's the thing that's a little bit different. And it's both exciting, but it's also terrifying because it brings up a lot of concerns. And, some, I think, nonprofits believe that AI will solve all their problems instantly and painlessly. It won't. And others may have fears, which are okay, concerns, but maybe they're outsized about it wreaking havoc and supplanting staff, and the robots are going to kill us all. So some organizations or staff are jumping in early. Others will do a weight calculation or maybe come in later. But one thing I think is really clear is that nonprofit staff engagement with AI is going to be necessary, and it requires really thoughtful preparation for adoption. And that includes ethical, responsible approaches, as well as really learning what the technology can do for us and being prepared.
Could you share maybe some of the productivity benefits for nonprofit organizations and professionals who are working in fundraising? You mentioned the dividend of time. Can you kind of unpack that for us?
Sure. So let me begin with the research. So there are so many researchers out there looking at all aspects of AI and generative AI, from the ethical frameworks to can we really measure productivity? So, and I'll share a link in a bit once I pull the thing up. There's a great compilation of all the research from the Microsoft Work Labs, and it's a great synthesis of all of the research that's available for the impact of AI in the workplace. But a couple of studies I'm going to call out. There was a study that was released last year at the end of the year from the Harvard Business School, and it compared two groups of consultants, both quote knowledge workers. One was given AI tools, ChatGPT, tools that we all have access to, and the other one was not given access to them. And they were all asked to perform something like 18 different types of tasks that they do as part of their work. And this could be writing, writing materials, writing a report, developing a strategy, doing analysis of some data, and so forth. And the group that used the AI tools that we all have access to completed 12% more tasks, 25% faster, and with 40% higher quality. So it can help. And this is not just an outlier study. There's many, many more, and I can share some of those with you. So it can save us time, and it can help us learn new things faster. And it can also improve the quality of our work. And when Allison Fine and I started researching the use of AI in nonprofit organizations, leading to our book, The Smart Nonprofit, we said when used responsibly, there's a key benefit, and this is the dividend of time. It's not just about efficiency, doing stuff faster, but it's really freeing up time to allow staff to reduce some of that energy draining, repetitive kind of labor intensive work and refocus instead on mission critical work. And I think this really is around relationships, right? It's the deep relational work we need to do with each other on our teams, right? And also as we're cultivating major gift donors. So the dividend of time is this freed up time. And I think that this is why I say that adopting AI is really a leadership challenge. It's not a technical issue. And so I think leaders, we have this, opportunity to reinvent this next chapter of nonprofit work, to really think about how do we want to reinvest that free time so we get more impact, whether it's building a better relationship with the donor so there are repeat gifts, or whether it's being able to collaborate in a more effective way internally to support our fundraising work. So it's on us now, I think. And that's the most important thing I think leaders should be thinking about.
You've touched on this a little bit, but there's a lot of discussion about the future of work and how AI may change or even eliminate people's jobs. Is this something we should be concerned about? And how should nonprofit leaders be thinking about this?
Okay, so I think we don't need to worry about eliminating people's jobs. I mean, jobs are going to change and they are going to be, quote, disrupted. Let me give you a couple data points. At the Global Nonprofit Leaders Summit that was hosted by Microsoft last month in Seattle, May Garlinghouse, who's the head of social impact, and Karen Kimbrough, who was their chief economist at LinkedIn. LinkedIn has something called the LinkedIn Graph, where they analyze job data, in-demand skills based on the kind of job descriptions and openings that are being posted. And they actually crunch some specific numbers for nonprofit jobs in terms of the impact of AI. And I thought this was really interesting. They identified that 12% of nonprofit jobs will be changed and 39% will be disruptive. And I had a chance to sit next to Karen at lunch, and I asked her, what do you mean by disrupted? Does that mean the job is going to go away? And she said, no, it's skills that are going to be disrupted, not jobs. So disrupt means that there'll be either time savings, not the elimination of jobs. It means also that leaders need to think strategically about that investment of free time into more critical work, as I mentioned before, but also reskilling, and reskilling not only just to learn the technology, but also what's going to be most in demand are the human durable skills, things that the technology can't do, like person-to-person communication, empathy, continuous learning, problem solving, creativity. These are going to become more important and more valued. So it's really important to have kind of a strategy around how are we going to rethink jobs as the technology is more adopted. And I think also talking about it in this way can help calm down some of the fears. And I do want to tell a story. I was just reading this article. I thought it was really fascinating. It was about the adoption of the spreadsheet over 40 years ago. Can you imagine that? Like the spreadsheet's been with us for that long. But when it was first introduced, there was a job function called accounting clerk. And one part of their job was to basically write down numbers by hand and then take a calculator. Remember those big old clunky calculators, and then add them up and then write it in a column, right? And it was very time consuming. Well, of course, the spreadsheet automated that, right? Because it can do sum, at sum, plunk, done, right? And so you would think that there would have been a lot of out of work accounting clerks, but what would happen is that they got reskilled, they learned the technology, and today there's more accounting clerks than than there were 40 years ago. So this is the kind of thinking we have to think about. What are the skills that may be disrupted, and what kind of reskilling training do people need? So within this, I think it's important to think about to address any concerns about job security or loss of job or even loss of purpose. I've been hearing, but I like writing from scratch, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose my sense of purpose if I don't do the writing from A to Z. And those start with conversations. The second thing is to emphasize the concept of co-botting or co-piloting as a concept. And that's where the machines do what they do best and the humans do what they do best, right? So if we're looking at like generative AI writing tools, maybe you as a human are really great at the first draft, but your area of improvement is editing, right? Well, that's how you would use the generative AI tool. Or maybe you're one where you don't like to start with a blank canvas, right? What is it, writer's block, right? And maybe that's where you use the generative AI tool to generate the first draft, and you do the editing. And each person will have their own unique skills, strengths, and things to improve, and their unique way of doing work. So people have to really experiment and figure out where it fits best. But always the humans are in charge of that division and the final say. If we're also thinking about professional development, we want to include soft skills training as a strategic play. We want to encourage experimentation and continuous learning as part of the adoption, because no one has a manual on this. We're all learning together. This is really an opportunity, because we don't have to know how to code or have advanced technical skills to use this. Some experts have been saying, and I discovered this myself, just with 10 hours of working with it, you can become an expert. So those are the approaches, really understanding what the benefits are and what the limitations are as it relates to your own job and job tasks.
Beth, I'm going to jump in with another question in the chat. If you know this, do you know what types of nonprofits or sizes of nonprofits have the highest rate of generative AI adoption to date?
Okay, so this is anecdotal, or I did see actually a report on this, but it hasn't been published yet. So and what I've seen in my own work, that smaller organizations are sort of leading the way. And I think part of the reason for that is that they see the value, and it allows them to do things that they weren't able to do before. I was on a panel recently, and it was a very large organization, large institution, and a small organization with 3 staff members. And we were talking about adoption within their organizations. And the person from the small organization, 3 people, said, "Oh, we had 100% adoption within 24 hours because we're short-staffed, and this allowed us to do so much more."
Great, thanks. Good question. So we kind of touched on this with Krista's question from the chat earlier, but what does ethical and responsible use, especially with generative AI, look like? And what kinds of discussions, policies, guardrails do we need to have in place when it comes to this?
Yeah, and that's so important. I remember when I was working with social media and we're telling people, just jump in, experiment, but here I think we really need to be thoughtful of the potential harms that can be caused. So I think the first thing is that we have to be human-centered, all the things I just talked about co-botting, and always put humans first. I just wrote an blog post about this on Candid. I'll be happy to share that. And aligning a lot, addressing people's concerns about job security. So being human-centered. The second thing that can happen, because these models are trained on large data sets, which happens to be information that's on the internet, we know that it's ingested a lot of bias. And so we have to really understand that the information that may be coming back out, the bias may be creeping in. So we really have to understand that and mitigate that. And that's why it's really important for human review of all of the content that's coming from generative AI tools. And it's really important when we're putting these tools on the front lines to interact with our donors or for program delivery. So there has to be a lot of guardrails that are put in place. And even with using maybe some of the image generators, which have been trained on images on the internet, which are filled with racial stereotypes, we really have to understand that. There was a study where some researchers were pushing one of the AI image generators to push back against a stereotype in the global South. And they asked it to generate images of Black doctors working with white children to kind of reverse the stereotype. And it only, out of the 100 images, it was able to produce 5 images that look like that. And one of them was an African quote, witch doctor working with children. So a lot of racial stereotypes, but that doesn't mean that you can't push back. And in another experiment, the host of a show on Netflix asked the AI to generate images of elegant Africans dressed in very fine clothing. And what the algorithm pushed back was like very stereotyped images, tattered Africans in tattered clothing. So he put images of his own into the data set and then trained it based on those, and it was able to produce the images. So you can push back. The other piece that's important in terms of ethical and responsible use is privacy, right? We have to be really mindful of our organization's data, especially donor data that has something called PIP, personally identifying information. So email, right? Social securities, if you're numbers, if you're collecting that, credit cards, if you're collecting that, proprietary information that's about their wealth, right? All of that information we have to be really careful about, and especially if we're using those public models. So we have to really think about redaction, like what information is not appropriate to share in a public model. We also have to think about the risk or potential harm to the end user, and that's all about the use case. Like, I think internally using it to help you generate a first draft of something has probably a lower risk than putting a bot out on the front line to make decisions about who gets program social service benefits or not. So you have to look at the different use cases and evaluate the risks. It's important, I think, to have not only to have an ethical use framework, but also acceptable use policies. And let's just focus on writing tools, for example. So what happens with writing tools? I think that the risks are they can make up stuff. They're known to hallucinate or confabulate, to use Microsoft's words, because they're eager to please. And somebody described it as mansplaining as a service because it's very confident that it has the right answer, but it may be wrong. So that's why it's important to have human review of any output that comes out of the generative AI. It's also important not to be asleep at the wheel, which is when you don't look at the output, you completely trust it, because that's where you could go wrong. And it's important to have to understand what information can you share or not share in a prompt, and that gets at the data privacy stuff. And I'd like to have a green, yellow, and red. We will never share a person's email. That's red, right? Green is we will share generic situations, right, that don't name an organization. Maybe another red might be our confidential strategy, maybe somebody's job review or something, right? So you have to really think through what is green, what is yellow, proceed with caution, and what is red, no, we never do. And so an acceptable use framework, and I'll share in the resources kind of steps to go through. It has 4 parts. It starts with your values. It has norms. It has rules, and then use cases and playbooks. So values, this is about like really understanding threats and opportunities that the AI poses to your work, like what I just laid out for generative AI, how it's going to impact your staff or your external stakeholders, and how you're going to reinvest the time savings, right? What are your values around that? Norms are kind of like a compass for your employees to guide them on how they use AI in their daily tasks, and if they need to use it at all. I like to say that AI is hot sauce, not ketchup. You may not want to use it in everything, right? And also that there's final human review. Rules, I mentioned this, but in addition to like kind of the privacy rules, are you going to require a basic training? Are you, what parts of the workflow should always be done by a human? And then you also want to include like specific use cases and maybe share prompts. So that's all the stuff, thinking and discussion that might go into a written acceptable use policy that's included with all of your other acceptable use policies in your employee handbooks. Sorry, that was a long answer, but there's a lot to this topic.
Definitely. And I know we received a lot of questions about that. So I think everyone here hopefully appreciates the length of your answer. And hopefully we can jump into a couple of those elements in the demo a little bit later. But first, do you think you could share just a few examples of use cases in nonprofit organizations in both fundraising and programs?
Sure. So the simple, easiest place to get started, I think, is with generative AI writing tools. And I think it's a relatively safer use case than, as I mentioned, a bot on the front line. So every area of nonprofit work, no matter what function, staff function you're in, could probably use this in some part of their workflow. Maybe for your work, you know, donor profiles, or maybe a strategy or a first draft of a thank you letter. I think somebody told me the other day, and they are a major gifts officer, they said that they agonize for hours over their thank you emails, right? And that with using, you know, a generative AI tool, it helped them get to that first draft quicker. And also they asked it for feedback on that first draft, and it helped them revise it. Survey analysis. I think another use case is in the organizational collaboration tools, and this is with things like the Office suite or Google, Microsoft Office, or Google Workspace, because what we have is something called the, excuse me, digital debt. I think everybody has faced this, where you have too many emails to process, you can't even concentrate, or you're jumping from meeting to meeting, right? And you have to process notes. A lot of the tools that are being built into these collaboration tools can, like, for example, with email, you've probably gotten a long-winded thread where a million people are jumping in. I see you nodding. And it takes you a long time to figure it out. Well, with Copilot for Outlook, you can click a button and it summarizes the key points with a link to the actual email. And that can like reduce that digital debt. Or taking notes at meetings, right? Or finding scheduling. AI embedded in these types of collaboration tools can really help this work not only be a little bit more efficient, but also reduce that overload from being on the screen. In terms of specific examples, there's an organization in Florida, the small organization, they're called Agape Source, and they work with, they provide training to recent immigrants, like things like financial literacy and those sorts of things. And one of their financial literacy classes, they were teaching them how to fill out different tax forms. And the IRS forms, I don't know if you do your taxes, but they're not the easiest to understand, even if you're a native English speaker. And what they did is they asked ChatGPT to translate it into simple English. And the students were able to read it much faster and understand it. So so that was really helpful. A small nonprofit ocean conservation fundraising team, they asked for ideas for free or low cost donor recognition gifts. And it gave them, I was talking to the development director, she said it gave us like 20 ideas, and half of them I hadn't even thought of. And one of them was to create playlists. And their donors were across the world. It was a global organization. And then they asked it to identify songs in each of the countries that were not controversial, that everyone would know and like. And they said that this saved like hours of an intern's time doing this kind of desk research. PetSmart charities, I love animal shelters. I'm a big supporter. They just, if you know about animal shelters, there's a big crisis with them. I saw somebody from the Humane Society, so they know all about this. There's too many animals in the shelter. They're not getting adopted fast enough, so they end up being euthanized. And so the idea is you want to like get those pets adopted as fast as possible. And one piece of that workflow are those descriptions that you see on a website or maybe on the cage. I see you, Krista's nodding. I mean, that's how I got my pet, because I saw one of those.
Yeah, and they're getting more and more creative these days.
Well,
they're fun to read now.
they are, but they do. I have talked to folks that are at small shelters and they're really busy and they're busy taking care of the animals, and writing is like, when do I have time for this? And so PetSmart Charities released a tool specifically to write these descriptions. And you check a list, is the dog male or female? How old is the dog? What breed is the dog? And you check it off. How would you do, what personality, any other information? And then you click a button and it generates a beautiful description for those labels in seconds, right? And then you would edit it, of course. So I think that's a really great example. And it shows that, it's saving that time and it's freeing up staff to really focus on tending to the animals. And it's also hopefully speeding up the time to adoption and emptying the shelters. So these are all use cases, but I think you have to provide training, that experimentation, and then the guardrails that I mentioned above as you begin to apply them.
Beth, real quick, this wasn't a question we had, but a question that just came to mind. You mentioned Copilot with like Outlook summaries of emails and then like taking notes at meetings. Do you have like a recommended source people can go to kind of learn more about using those features, or is it just like Microsoft?
Well, I can give a specific resource for that. If you go to Microsoft for nonprofits, there's an online community, and I'll share a link in the chat before we leave.
Okay.
With all of these. And then if you go to adoptionmicrosoft.com and you go to the section on ChatGPT, there are tons of training materials and one sheets and decks, lots of resources on how to learn how to use the various Microsoft tools. Each of the platforms has their various resources, and that's a really great place to start, is to look at their resources. That's how I started.
Great, thanks. I think one last question before we jump into a demo. You've mentioned a lot of different ways that people can adopt this new tool into their work. And I'm sure a lot of people's gears are turning in their heads about how they're going to use this moving forward. But what should be in a team or organizational adoption strategy for this? And how do we even get started with that?
Sure. So I think I'm going to repeat of what I've mentioned before, but I think the very first step, address the fears around any job insecurity, and really take the time to answer any questions and address those. Encourage low risk experimentation. That's that very first step, because you really have to put your hands on it, or before it puts its hands around you. You have to get your hands around it before it gets its hands around you. And that's really about having that growth mindset. And the shift is letting, like, the AI might do the 80% of the work, and then you're focusing on the last 20%. Maybe one shift, like it creates the first draft and then you shift into becoming an editor. Or you write that first draft and you use it to help you edit. So it's really figuring out, like, what's the best way for me to use this sparingly and well. Leadership should be modeling and being encouraging. It shouldn't be something that people are sneaking around doing. It should be very explicit that it's an organizational adoption. So that's things like, are you going to provide the tools to everybody, right? Are you going to reimburse staff if they have their own ChatGPT subscription and so forth? Providing structured training And again, I mentioned a lot, that's really, it begins with prompt engineering or figuring out the right questions to ask and how to work with it. Larger organizations have what I call a bright spot group, or they have a group like one department or one team that's really interested, that wants to experiment and is willing to share their lessons with other folks rather than rolling it out to everybody. So start with a small group, or it could be from across different departments. They're the bright spots because they become like a little bit, they can talk to their peers and, you know, share ideas with their peers. And then maybe introducing it at meetings, like I mentioned, and or for the whole fundraising team, and then maybe getting up to program delivery ideas as well. But I think that really first place to start is that addressing the fears and encouraging experimentation.
Great. So do you think you could walk us through an example maybe of how a prospect development professional or prospect researcher might use one of these tools kind of in their everyday work?
Sure, and I'm going to ask you to help me
Sure.
because I'm not a prospect research developer,
well, you got
right?
plenty of them here to help you. So
Okay, so I was playing around with this, and again, you know, this is real life. I'm just showing you here. Sometimes, you know, the technology doesn't always work, or it does things that are weird, and that's part of it, right? So I'm just picking something. I'm just going to go to Copilot. Let me see if I can share my desktop. I can't share my screen. Do you have
one second.
While we're doing that, quick question came in about what level of abstraction do you think is necessary to use when asking ChatGPT a question? So the example was they're a data scientist and they're afraid to give a specific column or table names that they work with. So they redact or modify these to be so generic to render them almost meaningless to someone who is not in their head. So yeah, so kind of how do you decide how much to remove?
Okay, okay. So some of that's going to depend on your context and what your organization's level of what it thinks is proprietary information and what is okay to share, what's confidential, what's proprietary, what's private, personally identifying information, right? That's so in the data that you're sharing, right? And let's see if I can share. Oh, I can. Great. This is just an example. It's one organization. I'm not. You have to discuss this within your organization, and this is just an example of for using it in generative AI writing tools or spreadsheet tools to do analysis. What is your data policy around the information that you're including in the model or including in a prompt? All right. So green, it's okay to share in prompts and materials shared with AI. Your role in organization name. Now, some organizations might say, I don't want my name, I don't want my role or organization's name shared. This organization felt it was okay. Anything that was publicly available about their organization's work, so any content that was existing on the internet on the website about them or that they were sharing that was out there. This group also said customer feedback, but we would remove people's names, emails, anything that was personally identifying, but we would share their words, like it was open-ended questions. Strategy, timeline, communication. And this organization said, if this is confidential or sensitive, we're going to remove our organization's name. And so yellow, and you can see red. These are more around specific privacy and identifiable information. So this is, you know, just an example. I'm not suggesting that you all of a sudden cut and paste and adopt these. I think your organization needs to have that conversation about like what is confidential information in your organization's context. And I mean, personally identifying information is pretty obvious. As I said, you know, someone's name, their email, their wealth statistics, those sorts of things. Hopefully I answered that. So Anyway,
That
so
was great.
and also I will share one thing just around, because there was in this question that was in the chat, there was another question about like how specific should the prompts be, and this is what, you know, a good prompt, right? It's kind of like that you want to have the role, the context, and as much context as you can provide without, you know, violating personal privacy and confidentiality is a good thing. You want to describe the task, the output, and the format, and be very specific there. So this is like when I'm teaching prompting, these are the things that I encourage people to put in. And again, context is where I think we're going to run into trouble with privacy and confidentiality. So that's where you really need to think about what you're going to share in a public model. All right. So should we try a prompt? All right.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So how about, you were telling me the other day, and there was a question that came in, and I asked you, what is a PD profile? And you said that was a prospect donor profile.
Prospect development. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So let me share my desktop. Okay. So one thing that generative AI is really good with is people, if you don't know, it helps you can learn faster. So I say, please share what goes in a prospect development profile that is provided to a major gifts officer, right, to prepare for meeting. Sorry, everyone's going to see my typos. Meeting with a donor to cultivate or ask for a gift. That's how it's used. Please give me a description of the different sections and what information is included. So let's see what it does. And again, let's click. And I'm using Copilot Plus, which is the paid consumer version. So it has, and the value of this one is it gives me priority access. It's faster, and it's using the ChatGPT 4 Turbo and 4, which you have to pay for over an OpenAI. So let's look here. Is this the kind of stuff that goes in one of these reports? I'm going to ask.
Definitely.
Okay. Is there anything here that that would never be in the report? Or looks stupid?
I mean, some of it is not information that we would provide. It might be something that the major gift officer would have to provide, like the engagement strategy or the stewardship strategy after we provide the information.
Okay. All right. So, and it's giving there. Okay. So I knew nothing about this job, but all of a sudden, instead of having to research and read a bunch of stuff and synthesize it, I have like a first draft of a format. Okay. So now I'm going to say, please create a fake PD profile based on the above format for me. And, you know, there's research that says if you ask it nicely, like say, please, or I'll give you a tip and then thank it, that it does a better job. But I've also seen research that said that you don't have to be polite, but somehow etiquette has been ingrained in me. So I find myself saying please and thank you. All right. So I just asked it to create a fake PD profile. And you can see it's so happy to please. Certainly, here's a fictional.
Generosity City.
The last time when I was playing with this before, it actually looked like what appeared to be somebody's real name and address. Okay, so here's, you know, maybe these would be a little bit longer. Would a PD profile like just be bullet points like this, or would it be actually, it would probably have some more information in it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different approaches based on different types of nonprofits. And I know we did a study looking at people's templates, and a lot of them look different, but a majority do have these types of bullet points. And then like we talked about yesterday, there's usually like a summary section where they will summarize kind of do like a narrative about the data that they pulled.
Okay, so right now I made this generic, but now I'm going to make it specific because you made me think. I'm going to make it specific to an animal shelter. So please revise the PD profile for a major gifts officer who works in an animal shelter, who is visiting a donor, who may be interested in making a gift to one of its programs, and also use the format above, but include a summary. Let's see what it does. Sometimes if you give it too much to think about, it messes it up. It conflates things, or doesn't do it as well. So sometimes I do a thing where I thread or build. So I ask for the this, and then ask for a summary second. Okay, so here it is. And we can judge whether or not this is good enough. You're always going to be editing. So this might be your first draft, and then you incorporate other information into it. And then once you have it, you could do something like, what questions might the donor ask me when, what questions might the donor ask when the major gifts officer visits? So it's giving me the list of questions. Okay. Please revise this list of questions into a Q&A with answers for the questions. Let's see if it does that. So, and of course, again, this is first draft. All right. Any other? So it's generating it, and I have my first Q&A to be edited, of course. With I'm not going to fall asleep at the wheel, because you'd want to read it closely to make sure it's not making up anything. The other day, I was playing around. I was asking it to write up descriptions of different fountain pen ink, and for a specific ink called sepia brown, and it wrote a description of it being purple. And I said, wait a minute, that color sepia, not purple. And then it apologized to me and it revised it correctly. But you always have to read the output.
Beth, someone asked if you could take a research template, push it in, and ask for data to be pulled back on someone. Any thoughts on that?
Okay, so can you restate the question?
Yeah, so pushing like a template in and then asking them to populate information on someone. We prospect researchers typically rely on a lot of different tools that they have to pull different types of information from. And so this would, potentially be a one-stop shop, but I know other people have mentioned it not like the accuracy could be potentially more questionable than going through the different ones. Oh, sorry. Wait, never mind. I've misinterpreted. Let me see. Oh, formatting information collected. So are you saying like, I guess potentially what they're asking, like, is your template kind of hard to format, and so you want ChatGPT to do it for you? I don't know if I'm fully grasping the
question. It can do that. You would, I have played with this with the example I just met. Like I'm using my hobby, all right, but it's the same kind of idea. Not only do I like the fountain pens and inks, but I also maintain a database for myself of them. And for a while before ChatGPT, I would go out and I'd research an ink that I got, and I would cut and paste all this information into a document about the particular ink, and then I would use that and revise it into a format that would say, company history, description of color, qualities of ink, line that it is, ink line that is, all the different categories, right? And I would do that, and it would take me a long time, right? But what I did for myself now is I created a because it's a paid version, it's ChatGPT 4 Plus. I'm able to create a custom GPT that's just for me. I opted out of ChatGPT 4 using my information to train its model. I lost access to the store, but I didn't care. And I created rules for it that said, search, in this case, search the internet or search my database and write a description for this ink with the following categories. And it does it, and it does it pretty well. I do have to do some editing. You always have to, it's not like click button and there you go. It's not a transaction. It is more like a relationship. So you really have to work with it. You have to read it. So yes, you could create a custom chat GPT, and let me show you. Here's mine. This is my fountain pen. It's fountain pen and stationery. And, and I could have it, write descriptions for me if I want, or I could ask it. I have a spreadsheet uploaded with different fountain pens I own. And I could ask it if I, list all of the Lamy Safaris that I own. I'm not going to do that right now because it would be embarrassing. but here, this is a custom version of ChatGPT, and you have to pay for this. It's like $20 a month, and you can edit it. And the way you set it up, you edit it, and you have to, give it a description. You have to give it the instructions. So here you might tell it to put things in a certain format. You give it some test questions. And then down here where it says pen data view, that is my spreadsheet of fountain pens that I've uploaded. So you can upload different documents in this. And I've made this one, it's not available on the internet. It's only private to me. So you get that option of who has access to this ChatGPT, and right now I'm the only person who does. And I also clicked a box where I opted out of it training other, using my data to train its model. So, and I don't, still don't put my name in here. Like my name is not in any of the data sources. It's only stuff that's basically publicly available on the web about fountain pens.
Great. Any questions? Any other examples, demos people want to see?
Okay, someone asked a good question. Is the paid version you're showing more secure? Like, okay, no, that's it depends. Okay, so so you could get a secure version of, and let me pull this up, let me show it to you. So Copilot in the nonprofit license, right? Which is the enterprise version of Copilot. The same Copilot interface that I showed you right here. That's out. This is the Copilot Plus that's out here on the web. If you get the Copilot license with your Microsoft 365 license, it provides enterprise level privacy and security, which is basically they are not using your information to train their model. Microsoft does not have visibility of what you type in. There's not a human from Microsoft snooping on the other side of this. And you can actually, if you go to the nonprofit, Microsoft for Nonprofits, and you look at Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses, you can look at all the features, and it says enterprise level privacy and security. You can click through and you can read all their papers about it and feel, secure about it. So that's the way you would have to, to answer that question, you have to figure out what's the tool, what's the use case, what's the vendor's privacy policy, and then and even with all of that, do we trust them?
And Beth, do you know if that's user by user purchase or if that's like org-wide purchase? I know that's
Okay,
a
that's
bit
the
detailed.
you get the organizational license, right?
Okay.
And it comes with X number of users, and I think they charge by the number of users. And I believe you have to go to the site and look, and you have to talk to them, and you have to apply and all that. There's just different pricing tiers. A certain amount are free. You do have to pay for Copilot on a monthly fee. And right now, I believe it's $30 a month per user. For me, as a private citizen, not with an organization, I have the consumer versions of the pro consumer versions of these, where the data privacy isn't as robust, right? But it's a little bit faster than the public version because it's a model or two ahead. And it also gives me the ability to create these custom GPTs for different use cases when integrate my own data. I only use that for things where the data is not like confidential or someone's private information. So that probably would not be a good use case for this in this area, because you're probably dealing with a lot of personally identifying information.
Yeah.
So you'd want an enterprise level tool.
Right.
I think we're coming up on time here, but Beth, if people have more questions, where's the best place for them to find you and find all these resources? We're happy to send them all out after to everyone who attended. But feel free to plug away if you'd like.
So that's my website. And then this is just, I do a lot of training on this as part of adoption strategy. So I always have ongoing resource lists. So this is my latest. It includes my stuff, my articles, my books, but also some things that I've read in different categories, links to training materials, to ethical steps on how to operationalize your organization's values into ethical frameworks, different use cases that I've seen, links to different tool lists and features. So, and I might also add that I had ChatGPT. When I collect these, I'm kind of messy, and I just plop in URLs, and I asked it to reformat it with create a link with bullet points. I created the subjects and the topics, but I didn't want to cut and paste the links in, and it did it for me. It saved me a lot of time.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. Just a quick APRA DC plug before we sign off. Our annual conference is coming up on March 14th, and I'm just posting in the chat a link to register. And if you're in the DC area, we'd love to see you there. And thank you again, everyone, for joining. And thank you, Beth, for a great session.
Yeah, thanks, Beth, again.
Thank you. And these are such great questions. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.